Well, good morning, everybody. As we watch the sunrise here on the satellite data from GOES 16, a couple of things really just stand out to me. First, the depth of this deep low that is moving over the Great Lakes. You can just see that if I just kind of show you from this morning when the sun comes up till now, you notice that it's not moving too quickly to the east. And you can imagine that behind this, there's a lot of colder air that's getting wrapped into the backside of this low. What you're seeing over here in parts of Minnesota is some of the snowfall that came this weekend, including some very heavy snow in Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're still going to be adding more to this today in Wisconsin. You can also see some of the snowpack that remains here in North Dakota. There's another system already forming in the Pacific Northwest. You can see the trough of low pressure bringing that southwest flow into this area. We're going to watch for a pretty unsettled pattern here to discontinue throughout much of this week. There is some good news next week for the West Coast. We'll get to that in a little bit here, but we're going to go into a much different pattern than one we saw last week. And last week, again, it featured this system finishing on Friday into Saturday, and that was the one that went through and gave us these precipitation totals. So a lot of this was from severe weather in parts of Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas. We had over 450 reports of severe storms. A lot of these produced some very large hail. But it brought in heavy rains down here along the Gulf Coast, up the East Coast, and into, like I said, parts of the Midwest. One of the things I was really encouraged to see was that much of the kind of eastern half here of Kansas, plus this corner of Nebraska and Iowa, saw moisture, saw precipitation. But a lot of this was snow much farther to the north here. We're going to see later today, I think, what these snowfall totals were, but much of this in through here and here was pretty heavy snow. Okay, next 7 days are not going to look like the last 7 days. This was the last 7 days, okay? Near record heat across this part of the country. That's all been changed. In fact, we can see early this morning here that the temperatures behind this low were down into the 20s and the low 30s. And one of the big risks we're going to be seeing early this week, and then again with another system that we're watching very soon here, is the risk of frost getting pretty far south into the central part of the United States. So if we look at our all hazards weather map, let's go from west to east. These are all winter storm advisories for parts of the Cascades, a section of Oregon, and part of the Sierra Nevada. Got some stronger winds into Nevada. Red flag warnings and fire weather watch coming out of New Mexico into western parts of Kansas, eastern Colorado. This is a freeze warning. There's actually a frost advisory that's underneath these higher wind advisories here. And then what you see in parts of Wisconsin are the remnants of the winter storm warning that's still here. It was over here on Sunday as well. We still have the large-scale hydrologic outlook. This is all about snowmelt still ongoing in these two parts of the upper Midwest. But if I come back to this quick discussion on frost, here's our latest map looking at the next 7 days. And so we did finally see the models hone in on this potentially being the southward extent over in the eastern Corn Belt of where we could get a frost. Some of this, of course, is at higher elevation here in the in parts of Virginia and Kentucky and West Virginia. And then you can see here that these are the areas we expect to see a frost temperature this week. The Willamette Valley, much of the Central Valley of California, will probably avoid a frost out of this pattern, but overall we've now returned to a much cooler look. So let's go have a look at these temperatures. Here's today's max temperatures, and shading represents the difference from normal. As we play from Monday into Tuesday, the cold air still wraps around that low over the Great Lakes, Ontario and Quebec, but a big warm-up begins in the Central Plains, so wildly volatile temperatures here across the midsection of the country. Notice the West Coast from Tuesday into Wednesday just stays cooler. Montana stays cooler, and we'll talk about snow in Montana here in a second. But a large warm sector opens up, and that's what we're going to watch out for on Tuesday and Wednesday. Let's go back to it for the risk of some strong to severe storms with this next system. All right, here's Thursday, getting into Friday, and now broad area of cooler weather moves through as a larger trough sinks in. Now we start to see by this weekend the warm-up that's going to happen across the West Coast, and the cooler air in the deeper trough in the central United States gives us our next chance for some frost coming through this area. But with that temperature pattern, I want to show you what we're expecting in terms of total accumulated GDDs in the next 7 days. So this is using a base of 50 and a max of 86, and much different map than what we saw last week. So we're not picking them up at the same rate, in some places not picking up any GDDs this week overall. Now the pattern is just important to understand as we think about this, because what's happening right now is we're getting some ridging building into the Bering Sea and Chukchi Sea, and you're going to watch over here a transition away from troughs in this area to ridges building between the Hudson Bay and Greenland. And so what that will do, see them there? There's the ridges. That will just help troughs of colder air get kind of stuck here in the midsection of the country. And it is a bit of a blocky pattern. In other words, these kind of get stuck in place for a little while, which is why you saw those temperatures toward the end of this week. I'm all the way out there to next Sunday already, showing you the colder weather sticking around. So what happens in week 2? Well, we lose one and gain strength in the other. What I'm talking about here is we lose the ridge here and replace it with the trough, but we maintain a ridge over Greenland and the Hudson Bay. So that's going to open up the west first to more mild air as we try to finish this month of April. But we'll have to wait on this to change, to really break over into mild conditions across the eastern part of the United States into the month of May. All right. Just as a reminder, though, possibly if the flow does do something like this, this is not a strong signal for severe weather to finish April in this area. So we've got it now, but maybe the last week of April may not see that. So I just want you to know, I think I was, before this, more convinced that we'd see stronger severe weather here at the end of April, but I think it may shift over into early May at this point. Okay, so let's go have a look at these systems. This starts off 9 a.m. Monday, so there's that deep cyclone we talked about, and it's going to spin up through the Great Lakes and into eastern Ontario and Quebec. Much of the country gets a drier go of it on Tuesday, but the next low has already pushed its way into the Pacific Northwest, and it comes out right here on Tuesday night into parts of Montana. So we're going to start off with some rain here, followed by some cooler weather and some snow on the backside. This is by 3 a.m. on Wednesday. And then we're going to see here, getting into Wednesday morning, notice the rain pushing out of South Dakota into Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that is rain falling on top of a place that just saw some snow here this past weekend. Where's the snow? Well, by Wednesday morning, we're seeing it in southern Saskatchewan and Alberta and Manitoba, and then this section of Montana and North Dakota as well. Okay, so after this, on Wednesday, we're going to keep an eye on parts of the plains for the risk of some strong to severe storms as well. I've included that in the report. But let's pick up our multi-model analysis right there on Wednesday. So here we go. You see there's good agreement between the models on where that snow is going to fall Wednesday. And then you can see getting into Wednesday night where we're expecting to see the risk of those strong to severe storms right in this area. And this also just means more rain for the Midwest. And potentially, look at this. This is getting into Thursday and early Friday. I'm looking at the blue in the northern plains, upper Midwest. There is snow chances Thursday into Friday there. Now, as we play this forward, there's another lingering frontal boundary for late this week on Saturday that could be initiating strong to severe storms here and some heavier rains. And as we play into the weekend, there's another shot at colder air that's coming in behind this, as you saw a few moments ago, a broad area of colder air here. So we saw this early planting window open up in the Midwest and then get shut pretty hard as we go forward. Okay, let's distill all this down to a couple of maps. This is the probability over the next 10 days of grabbing an inch of total precipitation. So you notice our setup is systems entering the Northwest, coming out of the plains, heading toward the Great Lakes, and eventually finishing in the Canadian Maritimes. So that, unfortunately, does not draw moisture back into this area, which means the drought situation there is probably going to continue to degrade with this pattern. But wet across a broad section here of this part of North America, including the Pacific Northwest. What about snow? This is the probability over the next 10 days of grabbing another 3 inches. So now we can see Montana, the Rockies, of course, the Cascades, but this part of the Canadian Prairie, Northern Plains, and of course, this is being added to what we've got right now today happening, where there's a winter storm warning. Week 2, with that trough developing here, we're going to see wetter conditions to the south of it. That's in all 3 models, maybe drier but cooler initially in this part, but that's kind of what we're looking at this point. Good model agreement between the CPC, ECMWF, and GFS on this week 2 forecast. Back to those temperatures. As we look forward at a 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies, we know that it'll be the west coast that breaks over warmer first. So you see it now down here in the southwest. This is out there April 22nd through the 27th. The colder air presses east, and we see warmer conditions trying to show up in the southwest, in the plains, and eventually in the west as this pattern hopefully opens back up. The biggest limiting factor on getting the west coast to really warm up is the fact there's still quite a bit of cold water here. And in today's report, through your email, you'll get a good analysis of what's going on with El Nino and the negative PDO and the warm water in the Gulf of Mexico and what that means to our long-range model forecasts. So in the report today, we talk about the European versus the National Multi-Model Ensemble, the newest data from the IRI Multi-Model Forecast Group, and our own CPC here in the United States on what they think summer precipitation pattern is going to be. I'm going to go over this again in tonight's in-depth report and also talk about temperatures, okay? So to wrap up this morning video, I do want to show you one last thing about South America. Mato Grosso do Sul through, Paraná, Sao Paulo, parts of Minas Gerais, very wet this week. Rio Grande do Sul, Uruguay, and along the Paraná River dry. That's almost the same thing we talked about last week. Near normal rains in Mato Grosso and much of Brazil's northeastern growing areas, which just continues to push this crop forward. I don't have any indications right now that the monsoon's going to shut off early, but remember, it normally slows down at the end of April, beginning of May. So we're seeing above average precipitation at a time when the monsoon normally slows down. And that might push this crop a little bit later in maturing, but that may only be in this area. So I'll wrap it up there. I look forward to talking to you all again tonight with the in-depth report. Have a good one. Thanks.